Okay, so you should have already watched the video on fiber arts, and your assignment for this unit, your exercise, is to design a yarn bomb, which is sort of similar to designing an installation, which you've already done, but it is specific to this kind of installation that's related to fiber arts. Okay, so I am going to tell you about yarn bombing, which also relates to our next module, which is on street art, because yarn bombing is a form of street art. So what is yarn bombing? It is the action or activity of covering objects or structures in public places with decorative knitted or crocheted material as a form of street art. So you may, in town, if you've ever been over by Cherry and Pickwick over in Roundtree, where Cherry Picker is, where Tie and Timber and Scully's and the Royal and all that stuff, Team Taco. If you've been over in that area, on some of the light poles, you might have noticed that there's installations of knitted and crocheted material on the street signs and posts and things. You can see yarn bombing all over the place. When I travel, I often see it in different areas. It's something that's been around for, it's kind of debated when it started, but the thought is that it's been around for at least probably about 30 years or so. And there are different, as I said, there are different kind of origin stories about who started it. But the point is that it's sort of a less invasive kind of street art because you can just cut the yarn off. Unlike graffiti, which is painted on the surface and has to be painted over or scrubbed off, yarn just comes off and doesn't really damage anything. So while it's still technically vandalism, it's kind of light vandalism. Again, this is not a permission slip saying you should do this. I'm part of a yarn bombing group in town. A few years ago, we yarn bombed the Sun Target, which is the sculpture that kind of looks like French fries that's in front of the art museum. We had permission from the art museum, so it's not really a kind of subversive kind of example of yarn bombing, but it was a pretty cool project. That's me when I'd shaved my head sort of recently, so I have very short hair. But we covered the entire thing, which was about 1,700 square feet of surface in knitted and crocheted material, most of which are group made, some of which was mailed to us from other yarn bombing groups all over the country and even in, I think, Sweden. And some of which people who were jogging and out in the park near there saw what we were doing, came over and asked us about it, and like gave us their scarves and things because they wanted to be a part of it. So it's kind of a cool opportunity for community building because people get really interested in it. It's very accessible. It's kind of, it's not as intimidating as some art forms, I think, because it's soft and it's colorful and it's fun and it makes something that you're used to seeing look different. So it's kind of a neat experience. That's what it looked like in the end. One of the more famous artists who does yarn bombing, who I mentioned in the fiber arts lecture, is Oleg. So Oleg has been working for at least probably about at least a decade and a half, probably about 2 decades, and she rather famously sometimes has permission to do her yarn bombs and sometimes doesn't. She's become pretty famous, so a lot of people invite her to yarn bomb things now, but she's been more subversive in her work. And she likes to do things that contrast heavily with what she's yarn bombing. So in the example of hers in the upper right, there's this tank that's on display. This is a weapon of war, an instrument of destruction, and she's made it kind of fluffy and pink and harmless looking, right? The charging bull is probably her most famous yarn bomb, and it has this very like masculine charging bull, commerce, Wall Street kind of energy, and she covered it in bright pink and purple and teal, fluffy looking acrylic yarn, you know, to make it a little bit absurd, a little bit silly. The largest yarn bomb that I'm aware of was this one, which was done in Pittsburgh. They yarn bombed the Pittsburgh Bridge. So this was a local group in Pittsburgh. And at one end of this bridge is the Andy Warhol Museum, which I think is kind of appropriate because some of the colors and everything with yarn bombing kind of recall pop art. So it seems like an interesting tie-in. Here's some pictures of that group of people doing that. And then there's just all kinds of opportunity and places for yarn bomb in different public places. And as I said, it's not particularly destructive. It can just be cut off. And it kind of makes things look interesting. So here are just some examples. One thing is if you get a wild hair, decide you want to try yarn bombing somewhere with permission or on your own property. Otherwise, don't tell me about it because I don't want to encourage law breaking. If you're putting yarn on trees, make sure you don't make it too tight, because as the tree grows, if it's too tight on there, it can actually hurt the tree. So be careful if you're working with organic materials. It's kind of better to do like light poles and inorganic materials. Rocks don't care, stairwells, that kind of thing. So that's yarn bombing. All right.